document, so if you kind of want to look at a much deeper level, you can go dig through that. But the 9 comprehensive plan elements include economic development, land use, housing, transportation, port and harbor development, recreation, public facilities and services, natural hazards, and quality of life. The planning issues are community issues that have developed over time and are necessary to consider in implementing new projects that follow from the plan. And so, as you're looking at your table of contents there, the section 2, if you kind of hold one there, to better our community. We value an open and responsive city government based on high level of citizen input and community involvement. We value a fiscally sound government that provides high quality services. We value a safe community and a feeling of security. We value orderly growth and balanced development that is driven by community consensus in conformance with the land use plan. We value a stable economic environment, economic diversity, year-round businesses, environmentally responsible industry, and employment that promote a high standard of living. We value diverse transportation facilities, including road, rail, air, pedestrian, and water routes that meet the needs of the residents, businesses, and visitors. And so that section 2, though, does go into very specific items for each one of those values that talks about them kind of more deeply. But those are kind of the values that we're based on. And then the next section 3, which we actually use a lot in our department, is the goals, objectives, and implementation action items. So whenever we're looking at anything kind of far as what we do, or if I'm writing a resolution from community development for city council, one of the things that is required on our agenda statements, and is kind of required for ours as well because of that, is that we do have to refer back and have like, what is there an item here in the comprehensive plan that we can reference that we are doing by this action. And so I would say for the most part, kind of like direct pieces that this commission looks at are sections 3.2 and 3.3, land use and housing. And so let me roll over to that, but those are pretty, everything that, I'd say everything we do probably falls under that in some way, shape, or form directly, but then also too as we are making decisions or writing ordinances or anything like that, a lot of times there is a lot of overlay that falls into things like recreation or public facilities and services, or we do have to take into account like natural hazards or quality of life issues, like is this decision going to affect the quality of life for Seward residents, and like looking at rezoning or those types of things, that the actions that this commission does. And so I would just, I've been getting more and more familiar with this document, but I do think it is important for you guys to keep this handy, whether it's on like print one out. We're more than happy to print one out for you if you need it, like a nice color one. But I use mine all the time, but I do think it's important for this commission, as you are making decisions, that we do kind of keep this in mind, because this is the guiding document for what we do. So, any questions, comments around that?
I do, if you mind. Because I've been going through this a little bit and trying to reflect on, how the town has sort of progressed a little bit on that, and the balance. And I think it's good as a guiding document, because it does talk about the need to maintain the small town atmosphere, the historic feel of our town as well, and year-round housing, obviously, and employment opportunities. And I think with this being something that's more of a point of maybe a guidance for us to sort of star to keep shooting for, because I think we're a little bit getting out of balance in that respect. Because when I didn't get here a long time ago, but I've been here since '95, and there's been a lot of different things have sort of changed, and we don't have a lot of the year-round things anymore. We do have issues with housing, and it seems like we're listing toward, if we were a ship, we were listing on one side to be more of the tourism, part of that. And I mean, tourism's great. It's brought a lot of, good things to town, but I think we're sort of like getting blinders on that, and I think some of the other stuff we need to sort of ratchet back a little bit more. And that's just my overview from reading the plan, and then also looking at the section 2 of that, or volume 2, the change, that definitely needs to be updated, because the 2000 and 2010 assessments of houses and who's living where and what, to me, I think is significantly different, and we may have to look at that, because where the incomes are and where our homes' values are, there's a disparity there, I think. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that this document holds itself in tension well, like you would say, like a boat is balanced. And we value economic development, but we also value like the small town feel at the same time, and those things are held in tension. And so I do think it is one of those things where we do have to kind of, when we see things getting out of tension, it's definitely something that we need to address. And I think if we look at kind of the data, like specifically, if we look at the last 5 years, we've kind of gone on an accelerated path for changes, and especially with 2000, like with COVID coming and being in the pandemic, that also kind of accelerated or exacerbated some issues that were visible. And so I do think that some of that research probably does need to be redone, because where we used to be able to look at things every 10 years, I think we're way off by the time we get 10 years down the road.
Yeah, I think you're right. Does any other commissioners have anything to offer or say? No? Anybody in the, outside, in the audience, so to speak, have something to say, or at this point, or Carol?
I really appreciate your comments, Claire. It seems that this document doesn't recognize that we have become a gateway community, and with all the problems that entails, and that needs to be recognized and updated.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So, and I know it kind of seems like we're setting this up for the short-term rental regulation discussion, but really like this right here is just what we're discussing today. That really, this is always in front of us. It just so happened to be that I wanted to make sure we update this, and this is coming at the same time. But I do want to make sure that this is kind of the document that we've had for a long time, and we need to continue to make sure we kind of use this as our compass for our decision making in our community as it applies to this commission. So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Okay.
Let's see.
And the next topic of discussion, and
Yes.
I can give you guys just a little bit of an update, and then I'll just as an explanation for my communication that I kind of put out there for this work session. And basically it's just kind of the intent of this discussion is to look at what basically it says right there in the first sentence, to reinstating the balance, because we are out of balance. And that I think it's pretty obvious that there is an issue that we need to address, and it's not going to be addressing this issue is not going to change everything, but it is an integral part of doing a number of other steps as we look to kind of create more balance in our community. And I did provide some background on there. The Chamber has been really great to work with in providing us information. They subscribe to some data for the work that they do, some groups that provide them data, and they've been great about getting that to us as we've needed, or giving surveys. And so just in general, we can see that there was a major shift in about 2016, 2017 for short-term rentals. And we know that we have about 326 short-term rentals operating as of 2021, and 125 are in city limits, and roughly 200 are outside. And I give you guys kind of a breakdown by zone, because I just wanted you guys to be able to see what we are seeing and how that is broken down. And then too, I did want to make sure that we understand that there's two levels of compliance. When we look at compliance, we have people we have Hamari, which is, they basically have a software that goes out and finds everyone that's advertising or putting things out there for the public to try and rent. And then we match that up with like the business licenses that we have on hand, and we take their files, whether it be business licenses, short-term rental permit, life safety inspections, bed tax, all those permits on file. So that is one kind of compliance. Are you operating, and do you have your city paperwork together? And so then the other level of compliance that we talk about is, are you using your property court like according to what you're allowed to do in your zone? And so those are the two different types of compliance. I just want to make sure when we're talking about types of compliance that we do have a definition of how we do those. And we have, because of Homari, over the last couple of years, we didn't have really like bad compliance as far as people operating without a city business license and all that kind of, all the paperwork. But that has improved over the last couple of years, and I think last year we only had two or three people that we had to write letters to say, hey, you need to get like your life safety inspection in, and there's a few other pieces. But for the most part, we've had improved compliance, which when you're doing a major like that, that's what you want. You want improved compliance. And then, but we have not done a lot of work in going in, because it does take a lot of work to find out, are you absolutely correctly using your home properly? We do have some ideas because they're a little more obvious. But I did put some of that data in there as well, especially it applies to whole house rentals, because I know that that's kind of a sticking point in a lot of conversations. And so anyway, that's the kind of the general data piece. And then from those articles, it's really interesting to go and look at, and for the last 5 years, there's been communities that have been looking and going down the path of regulating short-term rentals in one way, shape, or form, and as a way to bring their communities back into balance. Everything from big cities to people probably that are more like what we are, where there tend to be vacation-type communities or tourist-type communities. And so, which is nice, because then we can kind of look at what they're doing and how well that's working. So yeah, basically kind of the conversations that I'd like to, I guess, hear from you guys tonight in discussion would be around if we're looking at what type of regulation would be good, like as far as capping, and kind of maybe general thoughts around numbers around those things. Again, we want to make sure like short-term rentals are not a bad thing when they're out of hand or out of control or not regulated. They can become damaging. And so I think it's on page 40. What page was that? My packet here. But there was some questions about that I would just love for you guys to be able to discuss and get your thoughts on. Or else, and two, like if any, Madam Chair, if you want to ask for community input at any time, I'll leave that up to you. But it is.
Well, first, thank you for that. Thanks for the background on that. Before I really say much of my own thoughts on some of this, because that goes back to my original thing, we're getting unbalanced. You know, I don't want to poison the pool by my thoughts on that from that perspective. But I'll leave to the other commissioners if they have any thoughts. I mean, everybody's so new, so they may not have as much to offer at this time, and then I'll ask the folks in the audience, so to speak. Have you?
Well, I mean, I want to hear mostly what everybody else has to say, but I think, we're talking about caps and numbers, and definitely, I think that's the way to go, and we're slowly working towards that, it seems like. But I want to also say, most importantly, we can cap all we want, but once we have somebody to enforce that rule, it doesn't really mean anything.
And that's also consistent with the comprehensive plan. In several locations, it does specifically talk about enforcing and compliance to ensure that, people are following the rules the way they are. But if you don't have any meat to it or teeth in it, then people, you can give them letters all day long, but they can just blow you off, for a lack of a better term. So, yeah, I totally would agree. Folks over here have anything to offer? No?
My output on capping something is you're telling people that I've already bought property or that own the property, what they can do with it, and if it's within a reason. It's like, what I'm seeing here and what I've noticed over the last year is that the price of the property is at such a level that if it doesn't make money, you almost don't make sense to have it. So taking what somebody has bought previously or may buy in the future, and they've got that property and it's got the extra bedrooms that they can Airbnb out or rent out or something short-term, I hate to see them not be able to do what they want with their property, as long as it's within reason. But at the same time, I can see a benefit in having long-term housing so that we can have more teachers or more people, more families that can be here. I'm in the need of a house for long-term, so I want to buy a house, but it's hard to find them because everybody wants to short-term rental. So I can be on both sides of it. I can see the benefit for both sides. And if I bought it, I'd want to be able to short-term rental also possibly live in another location for the season. But it's a little both ways.
Well, I think capping it would mean that you wouldn't eliminate the people who've already done it. It would just be, sort of like liquor licenses. You only have so many, and that's all you can use for the time being until somebody sells it and somebody else buys it along those lines. So the people that have already purchased something and may be doing it then, and they're doing it legitimately, then they can continue to do that and maybe sell it as that, if that were the case. But, so many people are building homes and making them B&Bs or VBROs, and that's why we're in the problem, the issue that we have now is where people can't get affordable housing just to, work in our community, and that's what you're seeing. If they're rolling up the sidewalks, you don't have restaurants open throughout the year, and that is problematic. Becomes very much a tourist town, like a lot of ski towns, and I don't think that's what we want, nor is that indicative of what is in the comprehensive plan either.
So we would we're proposing to go with a cap and say we have 326, we have 125 that we'd be able to manage. If we got 125 in city limits as short-term rentals, would we put a cap at the 100 and say, only the 100 with permits can do the short-term rentals?
I don't know if we go into that detail full right now, but I think we need to cap it. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but I think we need something along those lines, because otherwise it's going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that's the path that we should start taking a bit of a look at. But
I want to say also real quick before we let everybody else in, but to what you were saying, we live in a city, and part of living in a city is having restrictions that everybody agrees on. And part of the city's part of the city's job and our job is to kind of deal with those restrictions that everybody agrees on. If you don't want restrictions on your land, there's land out of town that is, you can buy that has no restrictions. Part of living in the town is abiding by, certain restrictions that everybody agrees on. And so I don't see an issue with capping because, if everybody thinks it's best for the community, then that's kind of what you have to deal with living in the community.
So then we would put the cap, and then maybe the people that would receive the cap would start at the lower end and work their way up. That way the people with the less need wouldn't necessarily be absorbing all of the possible applications possibly.
I think it'd be multiple work sessions to figure out how it would happen and what level it would happen at. I think most importantly is to talk about what people want, whether they want to see it or not, and maybe get some ideas about what they feel it should happen, and then we can go with their, and council and figure out exactly how and the best way to put it forward.
I'll turn it over to folks in the audience. If anybody would like to come up and say anything at this point?
Who wants to go first?
Or you can just talk from right there.
Yeah, whatever you want, whatever you want.
You don't have to go.
No.
Question and then add some comments. Jason, can you please, we've had exchange of emails a few times in the past week on this. Can you please define for us? So it looks like I'm getting the impression 125 SDRs based on the maps on the city, the harbor, and Forest Acres. if the stars represent the STRs, is that what that is? Okay, so,
Locations of short-term rentals, but like a star could also represent, they could have multiple,
that's my next question.
Yeah.
So my question is, and this may be where we're still trying to get my bearings down, your terminology. So it's fair to say that when Harmony looks at this in the city, they're looking at the rentable units. So if there's a building in town that has 4 rentals in it, we're calling it an STR, but technically it's as far as Harmony's concerned, it's 4.
no, it sees, if they're advertising that as 4 different spaces, they see that as 4, and we also look at that as 4, but there's been an internal inconsistency a little bit, because some people have said, like, oh, I've got a business, and I technically have like 4 spaces that I rent, or else other people have the same exact like scenario, and they will list. It's because us as the city have not done some internal like licensing pieces, which we can clean up, but we can still identify. I can go through and be like, oh, I know this company has 4 spaces because we can see them online and Hamari sees them, and so the way we want to look at them is each space that shows up online as a separate rental unit, that is an STR. And that's what we're tracking when they say the number of 125. We have 125 separate listings spaces. Some of those could be a whole house. Some of those could be like a room in a house.
We'll continue that
Okay.
conversation later, but back to the concept here at hand, it pains me a little bit to be talking about restricting things, when we're in a free enterprise system, and we're trying to generate commerce in our community, so it's a delicate balance. We get sales taxes from our commerce. We don't get sales taxes generally from residences, so it's a delicate balance. And this situation, I think, has morphed over the years. We've got businesses that are for short-term housing, and they're buying R1s, and they're putting six of their employees for the summer in there. So we've got other situations. The B&B world started as a supplement for seniors. It's only supposed to be a supplemental thing to help the senior out on a fixed income situation. Look at where we're at today. So the genie kind of came out of the bottom. And, the challenges, when you're selling real estate in town at $50,000 to $70,000 over asking price, and, we're probably not in the R1 area, because you can't rent whole house in R1, but R2, a lot of things have been spot coded with that. And I think we did a nice job at showing our future zoning map, that can get back to. But over the years, the spot zoning just opened up a lot of homes that turn from an R1 to a rental, whole house rental or short-term rental. So, this thing has kind of gradually happened over time. And we're at today trying to put the genie back in the bottle. It's not going to be an easy fix. I see this, coming back a lot more frequently on this topic in the next 5 years. We're going to want to look, try, adjust. It's going to be a little bit more frequent than the comprehensive plan that we look at in 10 or 20 years. So and then, the 135, we don't know today if that 135, I think the 135 you were suggesting, or 130, whatever it was suggesting that kind of grandfather all these properties that are doing it now, so they're not going to be penalized. But there's nothing to say that, you can make that number 110, whatever is best for the community. The 130 did grandfather, the 110 is where we're at. Somebody sells their business out or their B&B out, and that house, there's that, before you release that chip or whatever you get for your 130. So you give back that space. We're trying to move down to the 110, smaller numbers, whatever we think we need to do to manage the situation in town. Nathan mentioned a good point, when you think about it, we can restrict this in town. This is where I get to struggle about the business side of things. If we can restrict this in town, we can go to 110. And you're absolutely correct. It's not going to fix our housing shortage in town. There's a number of other variables that can go into that. But if you go to 110, that person's gonna go out of town, they're gonna buy a house out of town, they're gonna pay $50,000 over it, because you can rent out 5 rooms for 100 days of the summer, for $200 a pop. You know, it's that. It's like a big chunky mortgage. So there's too much money, there's too much incentive in here from a monetary standpoint to not lean toward the short-term rental. 20 grand for a room on your house, that's a nice chunk of change for folks to find a way. Do that for 5 years and there's 100 grand, you're dumping money. So it's always about money. I've always told my kids, when they can understand what's going on in the situation, just follow the money trail and they kind of lead you to what's really kind of going on. So I'd hate to see us exchanging in-town properties and incentivizing out of town, because as you pointed out, we got 200 out of town. Yeah, that's 200 sites, that's not 200 rentable units. That was huge when you threw that number out there. I had no idea that that was that large.
Yeah, it's 200 rentable units, but a lot of times if you look at that, like out of town has more space because the people have larger properties, and you find like the units where they have like 10 units in them that they're renting out. There's a few of those, and so they tend to stack a little bit more. And kind of the throwing it out there as to what it was at 125 is because we are working really hard to develop more housing for this community, and we want to protect that. And so, and as we develop homes, we're looking at building different areas and making land more developable. We want to protect those from being land speculated. So that was kind of how we just threw that number out there, so that we can protect that. So.
Yeah, can I speak up again?
Yeah.
Without any, without us at least starting to make an attempt to put a fence around this particular subject matter, it's going to be real difficult for people who are already in the hotel business to invest in more rooms to try to fix the seasonal housing problem. Until Mr. Tugas built his new hotel, the number of rooms were pretty well defined. We were very short on rooms. He's since built another hotel. Substantial risk or a leap of faith that we're going to continue to get feds, but the more we don't deal up this housing situation with respect to SDRs, the more difficult it is for business people to try to make the right investment decisions. So I think it's incumbent on us to try to establish a framework on how we move forward on this.
Yeah, I want to mention, like Skip's right, it's not going to solve the problem. You know, we also have a lot of summer homes that are second homes for people. And so, you know, we're trying to increase houses, but it's not uncommon for cities now to start dealing with limiting the short-term rentals. But it's not silver bullet. We're not going to fix it by doing that if we decide to do that. It's just, you know, one more thing we can slowly work towards.
Could have to, because the short-term rentals seems to be what everybody's looking toward, and that it seems to incentivize builders and others to build those buildings geared for lodging and tourism, and then you don't have anything for the regular person that wants to come and work here. And, and maybe I'm not seeing it the right way, but I see that the ship has got too much stuff on one side, and it's going to list over in one direction or another, and a lot of you all have lived here a lot longer than I have, and you've seen how Seward was once before. It was it's still a fairly vital community, but you can't get to restaurants. Things are shutting down in the wintertime. There's an awful lot of stuff going on because people aren't here anymore because they have made their money in the summertime and they're gone. And that's, to me, is problematic. That's not a community. That's just a tourism town.
I agree with you, because I feel like the people that live here, there's no housing for them.
Right.
Long term, like so many people need year-round housing,
And that's the point that,
and you just can't find it, so.
Yeah. Anybody else would have anything to?
Yeah, I just want to touch on your comment there. We have 3 contractors in town.
Mhm.
And a lot of the homes in town, that are what I call the ranch style, 1,200 square footers, those were affordable housing back in the 80s,
Right.
the 90s when those were built. Contractor came in, he built about a dozen of them in a couple spots downtown. Those are what I would classify as affordable housing. Today, you're really talking probably nearer 250 a square foot to build out a house, and that's not granite countertops. So, you know, even if you try to skim it and went to 200, that's a huge number, you know. And so at 1,000 square foot, that you're already talking about, and that's not property. You're really talking 200. I don't even know if you can build out something that small for a family of 4 or 1,000 square foot. I think a family probably is better off, or better suited to have a house probably about 2,000 square foot. And that's still tiny.
Yeah.
So, you know, at 2,000, you're talking 400. And I just don't see where starting teachers and entry-level jobs. That's not our job to fix that, but that's part of the dilemma right now. And that probably doesn't even factor in full effect into this whole COVID supply issue, the way materials are just going through.
Going up,
So
yeah.
I don't think there's any, you know, turn the spigot off on that just yet. I don't think the new norm is
I've got lots of things to add, but when we're talking about putting a cap on, I think that our goal is to have more long-term people to live here year-round. So I think we need to have different categories when we're talking about caps. What if I live here year-round, I'm a school teacher, and I don't work in the summertime, and I want to rent out my house? Well, should there be a cap for that person when they're not taking up a full-time year-round position, but they just want to capitalize on the tourism that they're coming here? So they're going to go live in a camper. So should there be a cap for that person? They're not taking away a year-round rental. They live in our community year-round. I think that we need to have separate categories of when we're talking about cap. Or if you have a large piece of property, you have an acre, and you want to build 2 tiny cabins or 2 tiny houses and put those on there, what's the problem with having another B&B on that one? So I think that when we're talking about it, in my opinion, I think that we should have a separate category, like, do you live on that house full-time? Because if you do, you're not taking away from someone else buying it and then, so I think that's something that should be in the mix of conversations. Also, I know this isn't gonna be a very popular subject, but the Kenai Peninsula Borough, inside and outside city limits, really draws people that are retired to move to the Kenai Peninsula Borough. You get a $350,000 tax break on your property taxes when you live here. And I don't know what the city can or can't do. I mean, they could raise taxes if it's not your primary residence. If it's your second home of people coming down here, I think you follow the money. That would detour people if you have to pay a higher tax bracket because this is your second home and you are coming into the community and buying up houses for your second home and you don't even contribute to the community year-round. You know, I think that there are some more things that's not really something that, I don't know if the planning and zoning can issue that. That would be more of a city council thing. But I think that there definitely are more ways that we can detour people from having the second home because that is taking up our year-round houses and those people are not contributing to our community year-round.
I think you're getting taxes. I think I've had several homes and Seward's my primary and the rest, and I had houses in the valley and the rest. And in order for me to get any sort of tax benefit, Seward had to be my primary home. I couldn't live and have my primary home in Wasilla, my home in Seward, and get the benefit of, the tax benefit. So I think, it has to be a primary home here, so it's, they are still probably paying their share of taxes.
Yeah, if you were retired and you live here, but then again, that's enticing people that are retired to come down to Seward or in the Kenai Peninsula, and you don't have to pay property taxes. Whereas I have 4 children in the school, and I'm paying property taxes. What's keeping me here? I don't have a tax break, I'm paying into the school system. I mean, there's just different ways that you could encourage not having a second or third home inside city limits. And it's something that I've talked to our borough assembly about too, about enticing. Because they do, if you are retired and you live, it's your primary home, you get $350,000 tax break on your property taxes. So, because you get 300 plus the 50 because it's your primary residency. So there's other ways that you can talk about, but I know that it's not gonna be a popular discussion, but how to detour people from having a second, third, how many other houses you have in Seward, you know? Yeah, those, on those issues.
Carol?
Just to follow up on that, if you're retired and you are seeking well, if you're eligible age for that property tax deduction from the borough, you cannot rent out your home or part of your home for a business. And that's what one of our former commissioners found out, because he was running a B&B in his home, and then he would lose that significant deduction. So that's kind of a cool thing, that if you can't double dip, in other words. So that's reducing the number of nightly rentals. And the other thing we do is, if a second home is, like they turn off the water, the charge is higher. So we try to balance, you need to continue to help pay for our services, even if you're not here and using them. So they raise the rates on that, which I think is really excellent. So things like that. So I wanted to talk about this really cool graphic. And I'm just wondering, 94 to present is a huge amount of time, and so many changes have happened. I'm wondering if we can refine this to, historically, this would be a good start. This is what we have for this 94 to present. But can we break down this data into maybe the 5-year chunks or 10-year chunks, whatever? 10-year chunks initially, and then as we get closer to the present, 5-year, 2 years, whatever. It would be really informative, because I know I can just see some of these they're no longer short-term rentals. So it's like, well, but this is sort of like historic data from 94. So that's not really helpful to understanding what's happening now. It'd also be really interesting to know, to differentiate short-term rentals and split that off into which ones are whole house rentals versus this is a room in a house where a resident lives and they're renting out. That is I think, really valuable data to have as we try to work with zoning and capping, just to know, because I live in an R1 neighborhood, and I don't really like sharing my neighborhood with strangers. So like, yeah, B&Bs everywhere, and you have to deal with them, good or bad, you have to deal with them. I don't like commercializing an R1 neighborhood. But on the other hand, these are my friends and neighbors who are paying the mortgages by renting out a spare room, and so they live there, and that's really nice, that they're not just, a second home somewhere else, and then they rent it out all summer and stay there a little bit or whatever. So I'm kind of torn between that, but it seems like if we want to keep residents, in a home, it is beneficial for them to be able to rent out an extra room. And that would happen in these neighborhoods where we live. On the other hand, the whole house rentals are completely, they're completely replacing a resident. So the resident cannot stay there and rent a room. It's like, everybody clear out because we're going to rent this whole thing. And so I'd like to focus more on the whole house rentals and try to reduce them or cap them more, because they are completely eliminating a place where a resident can live year-round. And the other thing in our code, I was sort of surprised that you can actually rent an apartment or a fourplex, a multiplex. Seems like that we can do in code. You just say, no, you can't do short-term rentals in an apartment building or in a fourplex. It just seems, that's where people entry level, that's where they can afford to live. And why are we renting out to short-term rentals? So that's something we can work on. We can work on this cap idea, but we can also work on our code and modify the land use table where these things can occur. But it'd be nice to have really good data that's current, so we can say, well, hey, look at this commercial zone. These are, you don't have to live there, and look at all these stars where, homes are being rented out, and nobody has to live where you live.
Yeah, Carol has a good point. I never thought that just the one room in a whole B&B for a supplemental was the biggest part of our problem. What I felt was a contributing problem is our reputation in the state that sewer doesn't do compliance. We don't do compliance on parking, we don't do compliance on our short-term rental. So Carol's correct, the whole house rental, or a house gets sold and you have a 6-room in the house. That's a good area to start. Timeline-wise, it's the quickest thing to get our hands around because we have the code. We just need to get out there and just do a little enforcement. And so, with that in mind, I don't think we're going to have, the summer's upon us. I don't see us jumping into the restriction thing, 135 discussion right now. A lot more discussion with those, because they'll just create a brush fire we don't need. So, but I think we should put a plan together with a timeline. What compartmentalize this one. It's a big elephant to eat. We want to eat it one bite at a time. But I think a plan, no more than a year out, maybe by this fall, a draft plan. A lot of good suggestions and ideas. And I think if we get more people at a work session, it's specifically going to be about defining short-term rentals and the future of this. We might get more public participation and more ideas and thoughts about one of the variations of this whole rental side of the fence might come to our attention. And I think once we catalog and lay out all these options that are out there, we start to systematically work around that. We might be able to just take a little bit of time at each work session to tackle this plan, to bring maybe to the public or bring to people who are in these businesses to their attention in September before some of them leave the state. And we can't get them until so we try to get people at the end of the season before they head out to the desert. So, suggestion, but I think, like a comprehensive plan, maybe we have a short-term plan to start working on.
I think you're right, because we've been kicking this can down the road a while on trying to what to do, and then pulling this together and having an actual, timeline plan of some sort. And again, like you're saying, just take a chunk off the elephant at the time, and then maybe start working our way through it, because there are a lot of things. And there's been a lot of ideas I've brought up even tonight that I thought were pretty good idea, because it keeps people in their homes, and if they want to rent something out for the side or something, that's okay. And it's just those whole house rentals at times can be problematic when it's somebody outside that does that.
Yeah, you're just talking to some people already about this. You've got people in town, out of town, they're pretty much anti-government, so just pushing this at a cap is going to get hair on people's neck to stand up. So we need to do this delicately, with respect.
Yeah.
So I think it's, and I like the fact that, Jason, we use the comprehensive plan, the one about the community. So a couple of those value points maybe become a precursor on this plan that just helps people understand what is it that we're trying to achieve. Comprehensive plan. It helps us stay focused on those plans. Instead of having multi-plans around town, it still helps us focus on the comprehensive plan, but it's a spin-off because it's a current problem that we have to realize.
Absolutely.
I personally don't think that the whole house rental thing is going to cure anything. I can buy a house and just not rent one of the rooms out, and then I'm sufficing what you tell me to do. So, I mean, yeah, you have one room less for just a few less people, but that's that's still not changing anything. I think if it's your primary residence, I think that should be a key as far as what you can and can't do in that. Because again, a teacher, if they own that house and they live in an R1, why can't they rent out their whole house if they're living in their camper right next to their house? I mean, so what are you really, okay, well, just not rent out one of the rooms and then that follows your code. And then you're following what you're supposed to do. So there's too many ways to work around the whole house rental, in my opinion. If I were someone to say, okay, well, I'll just buy 3 houses and then just not rent one of those rooms out, that's following the code.
No, if somebody just wants to, do the workaround and maybe, working to their best advantage and not looking at it, because R1, when I got it years ago when I was here, you couldn't have a rental of any sort in an R1, R2, or R3, and you had to be an office, office residential, auto commercial, all the rest of those things, and, before, because people who spend all this money to live in an R1 area want to know who their neighbors are. And so that's one of the reasons why they buy in those places. But, your point is taken. People can do a workaround if they choose to try to do that, Yep.
Yeah. Now we're treading on, and this, I'm taking, to throw this out there in a really polite way, but that's part of one of our problems, I think, in town that we constantly deal with is the go-arounds.
Yes.
It's
dishonest.
Our code should be such that it accomplishes all the things on a comprehensive plan. You want people to do the moral and ethical things, and renting in an R1, your whole house lot. And I think that when we're talking about R2 for a whole house rental, so if the school teacher was in a house, the house could be an R1 and rent it all out, but it'd have to be they can rent it out as a B&B in the summer, correct? No B&B in R1?
You can rent out a room in your house, yeah, you could, like traditional bed and breakfast, yes, you can do that in R1, yes.
Yeah, so if the school teacher wanted to rent the room and make 20 grand in the summer, nothing stopping them from doing that. But then it comes down to what do we really want for our community? What kind of a community value do we want? I think that's the conversation we need to have. If we want to embrace teachers moving out of their houses and living in a camper.
They're doing it. I'm just letting you know, it's happening. That's why I use that.
And I don't know the reasons why, and I'm not speaking against that. I'm just saying it's interesting that there's other situations in town where we need to go do a go around and wink, wink, we think we're okay, So it's going to be a good conversation today.
It will be.
One thing I did want to communicate as we've been talking about this is this is something that we would like to implement starting January of 2023. And so that way we are, because we are behind on this. And we don't want to, we've been talking with other communities and looking at what they're doing, and we don't want to get to the place where Girdwood is right now. It's horrible. It's worse than we're at by far. And so we want to keep ourselves getting that. So this is something that we want to implement for 2023. And we realize too on our part, we need to have better defined code. We need to have very clear, better defined, well integrated code. And then I think we need to do a better job of communicating what that is and what you can and can't do in a very simplified way, because if you are not reading, if you go and try and read code, you can spin yourself around in it pretty quickly. And so we need to make some very simple documents that say, oh, I live in R1, this is what as far as this is what I can and cannot do with my property. Make it I live in R2, this is what I can and can't do with my property. And make it so it's very simple and clear. And we really need to do a good job on getting that communication out. And then also too, when we write the new code and build that, it does need to have teeth. Because if it's not, then we need to enforce it. And that way, that there's consequences, if the consequence is losing your short-term rental permit and you try and get around it and you're caught, then you don't get to do that anymore. I mean, that's just kind of the simple fact. We need to have teeth, and we need to have integrity about it. And so, so anyway, that's just from the city's point of view and community development. That's the approach that we want to take. We also want to have, like, in the kind of discussion items, we want to have a very clear fee schedule, because right now our fee schedule is not, it's not, you know, you can be having this huge property and making $100K a year, and you're still going to pay the same person who's renting out a room in their house.
Yeah.
And we need to change the fee schedule so it's appropriate for what you're doing with your business. And we do need to have a very clear non-compliance process. And
What is the, if you don't mind me asking, what is the enforcement mechanism that you'll have? Because you're sort of hamstrung. It's your office and, you know, Nate over at the fire department. You know, that's a lot of ground to cover.
yeah, and we've talked about this, and so we need to work a little bit more closely with building inspections when they do life safety inspections. That's something that we need to go and, like, proof the property better. And the thing that's nice too about is we have, like, a very defined unit of, let's say it's 125 short-term rental permits. We have you're not having a moving target, and you know those permits really well, and you know, like, those buildings really well, and so that way you can kind of, if you have this very solid, like, we know exactly who these people are, what their buildings are, we've been in them, we've seen them, and also too, now they have that, because I think it's pretty well known that there's not a lot of enforcement, or I think sometimes there's been, if it's either not a lot of enforcement or enforcement that has not been done equally. So those types of things. But we just need to, like, this is what we're doing, and we're going to do it equally across the board, and where you know your property and you're using it improperly. And
So you'll have sufficient resources, you believe?
yeah, because I do think that it's going to take a heavy lift up front to do this, and to be, like, going out and doing site inspections. So when Nate's doing his life safety inspection, we go out there and go with them. And we verify those things. And so, anyway, I think that it's a heavy lift up front and it's a lot of work, but I do think it's the right work to kind of bring the balance back in.
Okay. Yes, sir?
So I'm gonna qualify some of this, because as a city employee, if I give an opinion, that's mine, about the cities, but I'm currently employed at the city as the fire inspector, so I do what he's talking about with the life safety inspections, and it's a fine line with the enforcement, because if we go into a house and they say, you know, we live here, but we only rent out these 2 rooms, legally, those are the only 2 rooms we can inspect. Even if they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes, they're actually doing the whole house. We don't have the ultimate authority legally to go into the rest of that house. So that side of the enforcement aspect of it can be kind of sticky and tricky. There's only so much we can do when we're in the house actively doing that fire and life safety inspection. Now, you know, if we get wind of something, then we check on it, you know, and we do our best on that. My opinion on that is we have all the enforcement within community development, the fire department, with the building life safety, as well as the police department, to handle any enforcement that needs to be done. So I hear you guys saying, you know, what are we going to do to enforce it? I think we have everything there, it just needs to be done.
Jen?
First, I wanted to thank the planning commission. So there was a conversation, a comment made, I believe it was under council comments, if I remember correctly, and a council member said, let's start talking about limiting short-term rentals. So this spawned our conversations, internal conversations, and it's a Title 15 issue, so then it comes to you. So thank you, and it will be a process, and we're hoping to have the deadline of January, and with a lot of input. Just a couple things is that we do have the ability now to revoke business licenses if we get wind and cannot bring someone into compliance. Our goal is to bring people into compliance, not just automatically take away. Also, we don't want to hurt the existing short-term rentals, and that's why we talk about a cap, really actively identifying those short-term rentals and making sure that they keep that income that they've been counting on. You know, some count on it to help make their mortgage, as we know, because it's expensive to live here. We still want owner-occupied housing, and if it helps to have a room rented in their house to keep them in Seward, that's what we want. So I wanted to make a comment. Carol, you had said something about people in your neighborhood. My husband and I went to Hawaii and we did a VRBO in a neighborhood. And quite honestly, I'll never do that again. I felt like an intruder in the neighborhood. So it was very awkward.
Yeah.
I'll never do that one again. But, so I'll leave a comment on that.
We get cranky.
Yeah, it was, they were very nice. So, I mean, everyone was wonderful, but I wouldn't do that. So that's really what I wanted to say, that thank you for taking this on. It's going to not, we understand as far as administrators in the city side, that this is one piece of the puzzle that for housing. I don't know if any of you watched Senator Sullivan's address to the state today, but one item that he was talking about is the icebreakers that are, Coast Guard icebreakers that are actually in Seattle and Florida, because Florida has ice. But, so they're there, and his goal is to bring one up to Alaska. Seward has the perfect port for it, for a lot of reasons I won't go into, but we have the perfect port. So while he was addressing, I was emailing all of our local legislators saying, hey, Seward, we're here, we can do this. And one of them emailed back, yes, you can, but you have a housing issue. What are you doing to work on that? And then he was kind, how can I help you?
Good.
So, we do have Coast Guard that, for one thing, they have 13.5 million for housing, that they're going to be doing a housing project here. But we have more Coast Guard opportunities for families that would live here that would help our schools too, our population of our schools. And anyway, so as you're making these decisions, I think you're right. Think about whole house. Think about all of the pieces that we need to come together to work on housing. Because Seward is a wonderful town, and it'd be nice to, again, have all year-round amenities that Seward has always had.
Right. Skip?
You touched on, Jason, life safety inspections. I thought, I don't know where, it kind of predates several people in the room, but I don't know where this got started in the last couple of years. And I've heard it kind of appointed through vegetation, because in some instances, it's a small fee, it's considered a tax on top of all the other permits and licenses that people have to get in town. Has there been any discussion of maybe waiving the life safety cost?
It's already been waived the last 2 years.
Has it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carol?
I really like your idea, Claire, for the cap, the analogy to liquor licenses. That makes so much sense. That was like, oh, that's understandable, it's like we have a limited number of establishments where we want this certain activity to happen, and that this applies beautifully to short-term rentals. So that's a really good start. Just what would be a reasonable cap, and then differentiate and try to get, weed out those whole house rentals that do not service residences year-round for anybody. A lot of rentals, short-term rentals, plan pretty far in the future. Like, people are already booking for next year for 4th of July, for example. So rolling this out in January will affect some businesses who already have bookings that time. Just keep that in mind. There are some digs that are just so hard to get, they book on no requirements.
Assume we have some sort of like phase in, so it's not just
Well, given, now if we decide to do the one where it's like a no harm for the people that are currently in existence, it would not be a,
We'll have to almost show proof that they already had from the date that we set it.
We do.
Because otherwise they just say, oh, we already had that.
Yeah, we do. We have that information, so.
Yeah.
And then
I have one more question.
just a comment, sorry Rebecca just left, but she said that there's a lot of non-compliance, and I'm just wondering why these software programs haven't picked that up.
Because, like I said, we kind of have two definitions of non-compliance. Hamari picks up the compliance of like whether your paperwork is fully in, because it says like we can look on our side and say, does this person have their paperwork in? But Hamari is not able to detect like, to differentiate, like, our specific code and whether that person is is using their code, is using their home according to their code. That software, like, no one has that software yet. And that leans heavily then on us for like manual. And so that's why if you, in the packet, there was that there was that piece where I actually went, even I was using last year's data, but I was looking at the current listings for this summer. And so I went through, found it somewhere, listing by listing, and went through manually and be like, oh, that person is doing it exactly by code, and that person is not. And so it was a manual process where I had to go drive by properties to kind of like figure some things out, and so it was a little bit of a process. But we do have the capability. It just takes work for getting that piece nailed down.
Okay.
So.
Did you have something first?
You can keep going.
Okay, I keep rolling. Something that the commission is tasked with is definitions, and boy, we went through a lot with what is a sleeping unit. We don't even call them bedrooms anymore. So people advertise, oh, and then you can throw a futon in the living room, and they're just renting out any space without really regard to egress windows and, safety issues. So that's something the commission really can help with, is really define what is a safe space for you to rent out to a stranger for a short-term rental, where they don't, if there's a fire or something, they don't really know where they are. And just throwing down a futon does not make that a safe sleeping space. So I hope that it was really difficult. It's a real difficult thing. So the bedroom is apparently not as straightforward as one would think.
No.
But you can read most of these listings, and it's like, oh, and you can also have, we can throw more mattresses in the living room or the closet or downstairs or, upstairs with a ladder, and it's just kind of scary where people are allowed to sleep when they're unconscious and they don't know where they are. So that's something we can really help, and that might eliminate some of the sketchy places where people are currently allowed to rent.
That would have to be pretty tightly defined, and you're right, because that, that would fall, I think, with a certain amount of life safety kind of things, because you can only have X amount of bodies in this area and the rest, and I've seen an awful lot of that over the years, when we had a bed and breakfast for 8 years here in Seward, and the combinations that people were choosing to do, you're just thankful that nobody's got, got hurt, so.
And the inspector may not know that their listing says, and we throw in additional mattresses here and there.
Yeah.
They may only be listing it as, one room for, and then what's the limit? How many people are you allowed to pack into these sleeping areas? So that's all stuff, definitions that will really help reduce the number of people being.
Yeah, Nate, did you have something else you were going to say?
Yeah, so sorry if I switch gears just here for a second. So I know we're here mainly talking about the nightly rentals, but speaking to the housing as a whole and part of that, as the city starts to expand and they're looking at the bench and they're looking at other places, to me it's a no-brainer. We got to figure out the housing thing when you can't fulfill the positions in your city or whatever that are critical to your infrastructure, your emergency services and things like that. So obviously, as you expand, that's going to require more employees to build and maintain that infrastructure. So is there openness, is there thought to the fact that we're running out of room to build out, to changing the zoning to where we can build up higher than 3-story?
As far as that's come across, I know it's the 34-foot, has historically been the 34-foot limit, and I know that was at one point in time due to having a fire truck and a variety of other things, or a ladder truck, and then it's a view shed issue and a few other things like this. I mean, it's been on a discussion, but has anybody had any sort of, even before, when the other commissioners were here, that never really was brought forward as a point of consideration? But no. I mean, I'm from New York, so I'm no tall. So, it's, if you can't go out, you gotta go up. But I don't know if push comes to shove, if we're going to wind up doing that or not, I don't know.
We did bring that up and it was shot down.
There you go.
I think that you actually, I know it was discussed briefly at one of our early meetings.
Protsman property, I think?
Yeah, I think it was about Protsman, but then we also talked about, well, if you're up against the hillside, because I remember, I think it was Nathaniel was even talking about it. Like,
Change it.
Yeah,
Talking about a view
like
plane.
a view plane. Right, so if you're back up against the hillside, it doesn't really you're not blocking anyone's view. And so that, I think that the point was that there are definitely some areas where it might be appropriate to go there, and then at the same time too, we don't want to have a 10-story building sitting right here, because that also would not be a good thing. And so I do think that we did have some discussion, and there was some, I guess, non-objection to looking at some of those things depending on where they would be.
I think I talked about that view plane, and then everybody just kind of decided that wasn't exactly the thing they wanted to see for town. People come here for everything around us we want to see, and I think that everybody that I've talked to, the last thing they want to see is up, because of all the views that could potentially be taken from everybody else.
Skip?
Yeah, I think we got a ways to go before we start tackling height restrictions.
Yeah.
Phil's got, what has he got, about another 20 units you can build up there. Lindsay's own 25 acres, that's maybe another 30, 40 units. Another person in this room, in our presence today, has some property in the Fognick Acres area that could be developed as R1. And then, there's a large swath of private owned property over at Smick. That's right between the logging mill and Smick itself that might be a great investment for Coast Guard housing and cruising housing. So it might solve some of those challenges over in that side, since that's becoming the new economic mecca.
Yeah, Skip's right. There are places to go before we need to talk about going up. We just need to figure out how to get there. And, right now we need to figure out whether we need to talk about a cap for nightly rentals or short-term rentals, because that's kind of what we're talking about.
Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, and I want to just chime one last thing. Thank you very much to council for voting down the prior housing definition item. You're doing a good job, you and your team, to rewrite some of these definitions that we see before us today. So thank you very much for your work that you put in there. It's a good progress in solving some of our challenges going forward. So thank you very much.
Anybody have anything else? Anything else, Jason?
Yeah, I do want to just get a couple of quick comments. Hold on here. So, what are your thoughts on having kind of a, what would you call that? A fee schedule that, I guess, fits based on the size of your operation for a short-term rental fee?
That seems fair, honestly.
I agree.
I would agree too.
Yeah, I have no problem with it.
Is this a new fee for owner occupied? I was trying to figure that out.
No, right now we have a flat fee, so that way whether or not, you could have, technically you have businesses where you are renting out your whole home and it's a very large home and you're making 50 grand a year on it, or you're renting out like a room in your house. Those are both paying the same fees.
So it'll be the same fee for owner occupied, is what you're saying?
Yeah, so basically what we would want to do is we want to have a fee based on, if you're owner occupied, you would have this, but if you have multiple units or in your business or whatever, that your fee would go according to kind of the size of your operation, the size of your house.
Yeah, so based on basically the units, like one unit
Right.
this, 2 units this, 3 units this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also too, I want to look at whole houses differently than than if you're doing just like a bed and breakfast, like a true bed and breakfast. We want to have some different fee schedules.
That makes sense.
So how would you guys like me to how would you like our department to kind of bring this back to you? In what way, shape, and form? Would you guys like us to take some of these some of these ideas that we talked about, maybe like pick like some capping numbers and look at, like, hey, here's the data, the breakdown of like, maybe deeper dive into what we're looking at as far as data and the kinds of short-term rentals we have. And then looking at like, hey, this is how many short-term rentals we have in like the years coming up here, and give you guys kind of a breakdown. That way we can maybe look at what might be a good cap number, or at least one to have a conversation around.
I think there's two main things I want to talk about. I don't know which way we want to talk about them, but one, talking about the cap and the numbers. And then two, talking about what's being capped versus, so are we talking about everything? Are we talking, what do people want? Do we want whole house? Do we want, I think there's two first things. What are we going to do and how many? I'm not sure which one we want to talk about first. I don't think it matters to me, but.
Not really. I mean, we have to tackle both of them one way or another. I
Yeah.
think they sort of overlap in some respects, so it's good.
Yeah, maybe capping the full short-term rental, like the whole house is being used as a short-term rental, maybe get a cap number on those, and then maybe having a cap number on the bed and breakfast type rentals where there's a teacher that's still living there and still maintaining that house year-long. And then or the individual would still be able to rent out their house and not necessarily lose that because they didn't get that cap, or they was already blocked out possibly.
Now that go ahead, Skip.
Yeah, my business hat's back on me right now, so I'm thinking about this, and it's kind of right up there on the same level as the life safety inspection fee. I mean, I'm thinking about that full. We're trying to incentivize people to get a permit, and making it a flat fee just to make the permit. Unless there's something I'm missing from a revenue standpoint, we're going to probably make more getting people to be compliant on the sales tax and bed tax than we're going to give the extra $100. Then we irritate people by ratcheting this up, and then you heard from the building inspector, he's going in to inspect for 2 beds, and then somebody goes, well, I got to pay an extra $100 for the speed if I go 3 beds, so I'll just tell them 2, wink, wink, and then they do 3. We're trying to get people to be compliant. Trying to get them to understand what we're doing and to embrace that. So can you shed some light on why you might be looking for more revenue out of this?
Well, we're not trying to look for more revenue, we're trying to disincentivize short-term rentals. And the way you do that is by providing incremental barriers to make it more difficult, or to raising their fees a little bit. And so, or to maybe to think about, maybe, and I do think we should, other ways that we can incentivize long-term rentals. By disincentivizing short-term rentals, we can look at maybe incentivizing long-term rentals, which is something that we need. But I do think that the way I look at it, it's not, to me, compliance and abiding by the law is just what you should do. And we don't need to incentivize that. And so I think that we're trying to disincentivize land speculation and short-term rentals.
Are we already penalizing people who won't always get compliant? Are we going to raise their fees?
Well, but I think though, if you look at kind of what we've been doing, what we're doing is a little bit abnormal. Most places, I mean, I know places that are making 50 to 80K a year on short-term rentals. You're saying you should pay the same $30 fee that someone who's just putting a bed and breakfast in their house is paying? I don't think so. I think that we have to, that's part of doing business,
Fair business.
What?
Fair business.
Fair business, yeah.
I think I see what he's saying. He's saying it's just, we're looking at a way to make money. We've taken it away from, are we trying to get housing for more long-term housing, or are we just trying to figure out how to make more money off of what's going on? We can't stop it, but we can try to make more money off of it. Or can we try to figure out a way to maybe give an incentive for the people that are doing long-term housing to make it more appealing to say, hey, you know what, I will go ahead and rent it out because I'll get a decent tax break off of it, or whatever kind of incentives that we can give them.
It's not really making money for us. We take that type of money and put that into developing utilities for other areas, which is crazy expensive. We're not in the money-making business. We're in the try and create more infrastructure for our community business, and we have a lot of like, we need a new fire station, we need a new public works building, we need a new city hall, so it's not like we are taking this money and like putting it in our back pocket. We are turning around and trying to put this back into different things that the community needs. So that's the way I look at it. We're not, if we're going to, any revenue that the city creates is going to go back into, right now, like our focus is utilities, and utilities are putting sewer and water into places. It's like $500,000 every quarter mile. It's not cheap. And so that's where we need to put more money in developing areas. And if we're looking at developing places like the bench over there, it's going to take more money than we currently have. And so that's the way I see, like, it's not, that's where places like that money would go.
Well, let's keep going, then I'll go.
Hey, real quick, so kind of jumped off track. So I thought we're trying to manage the STRs by this cap, this alcohol license or a limited fishing permit. Of course, which if we do, you can't allow those things to be sold for $10,000
No.
per person profiting, so that can't be sold.
No, and that's written into that, like they're the city property.
Yeah.
And they are not sold with the property. They are not tightly regulated.
So are we accomplishing what you're trying to do by limiting things with this cap on the STRs? So are we adding another layer with this gradient fee schedule? So are we creating two mechanisms to reduce STRs or limit STRs?
No, I just think there's limiting and there's disincentivizing. They're two different kind of.
Why don't we plan the next work session to talk about this? I think now that we've talked a little bit more, I would like to figure out what we're capping before we figure out how many.
Okay.
Because if we kind of get what we're capping outlined, then that might change how many.
Right.
Instead of the other way around.
Right. So so that, like, what data could we get to you so that you can dig into that a little bit deeper? Do you want to know, like, exactly how many, like, whole house rentals, partial rentals? I know one thing that I do have in there is right now we have a definition that if you have more than 5 properties on a site, you're considered a hotel. But I know that there's places that have more than 5 properties that are definitely not hotels. And so I think we need to differentiate that. But what kind of data would you like me to get you so that you guys can make meaningful decisions?
I'd like to see the whole house rentals for sure, and as well as the ones that turn over the most is the short-term ones as well, and be able to have a comparison on those. I mean, I don't have a real big problem with some of the folks that, have an extra room or something, like that. I mean, because that's just adding a little bit, but they're still living in Seward, and they're still part of the community, and they're not packing up and leaving, and leaving their place empty as well, so.
Okay.
Is there any way to get a little information on what other communities have done for capping issues?
Yeah.
That'd be nice
Yeah.
to kind of see what other people are doing and maybe how well that's working out for them.
Yeah. I know, like, in one of those little links, there's an article on, like, some communities are completely, like, no more. I mean, like, cutting them out.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's pretty
Extreme.
extreme.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will continue to look around, and I'll get you guys some more examples of maybe communities that are more, just different things. I'll get you guys that information. So
Maybe you could, you mentioned the fact, and you can maybe just brief it, it doesn't have to be extensive, but you said that Girdwood had some major challenges. It is way further, it's worse than we are. What contributed to their challenges? And maybe it's something we can avoid and use that as a, consideration for what we're planning on, so we don't go down that same path if that's the case. I don't know if Homer is in the same boat or not either.
I understand from talking with, do you want to speak to that? I guess Homer's actually in a worse place than Assistant City Manager Sol was talking with, I believe their city manager, assistant city manager, and they're actually worse off than Seward is at this point.
It always has been. They roll up the sidewalks at the end of the season too. I mean, they just have a core little group, but it's a much bigger town than we are, but there's no services there.
Yeah,
And that's what I'm trying to.
And they don't have bed tax, they don't have licensing, they don't have a lot of those things to even like track kind of what's going on. Is there any, another piece is we do want to have like a very tight, I guess, non-compliance process and what we're going to go through and how we do that. So I will draft something to you guys that you guys can work off of. That's kind of somewhat specific, or give a couple different scenarios or options.
Yeah, because I would think your Hamari program, Hamari, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, because, you had mentioned the thing if there's only 2 rooms being used, but the Hamari program may be able to identify if there are like 4 rooms instead being used based on online bookings and the rest, and that might help in the compliance arena. And then you'll find out, well, okay, well, this guy's actually doing, more rooms than he's been inspected, and there's that issue of potential life safety things.
Yeah.
That may be something we can add on our part too, it's just a little background and research on some of that, because, we have the names of all of them, so a simple Google search can usually pull up whether they're advertising and something like that.
Yeah.
That'd be
I mean, that's
fantastic.
definitely some, even if it's just something we're suspicious of, that's a way we can look in deeper.
Yeah.
See what we can see.
Yeah, and I was able to find stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's not only just from the standpoint of, financial aspects, it is is it some glorified closet, and there's stuffing people in there, and then you have a fire, and there's a lot of considerations. That's a major point of concern for me.
Okay, well, if there's any other information that you guys think of that you want along the way, just like,
bother you.
and what we can do is we'll just add that to like the giant report, the next, for kind of the next steps, but we'll just add that in, and then we'll make sure that everyone involved in the know to begin with.
There's a stat that, I don't know if it would be of use exactly for the nightly rental right now, but finding out how many long-term rentals there are between September and April.
Right.
And then from April, that long-term rental has to find a new place, because now that owner is going to start doing nightly rental.
Yeah.
So I know there's a handful of people, a few teachers, that got kicked out of their place in April, and they're living in a hotel now. And that one particular teacher will probably resign because she can't do that every year. So this just might be a stat to look at, and just, how many of those kinds of places. But that's just, 1 or 2 or 3 teachers that I'm thinking of, but I'm sure that there are more like Sea Life Center employees that came in the fall, they had a place to live, but then come April, they had to go find a new place to live, and they can't find it.
Spring Creek was the same way too,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of officers, when I was the superintendent there was officers that actually had to quit and leave because there was no place for them to go.
Right. So that might be another interesting stat if you can get that somehow, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good one. Thanks, Sharon.
Okay.
Carol?
Just like to backtrack a little bit about how the fees were waived for the life safety inspection. And I'm just wondering, that is a cost of business, doing business, tax deductible. And we pay the $300 fee for a rezone or replat. We pay fees to help pay for the services that we receive. So I'm not sure why the public should have to be paying and subsidizing that cost of doing business for the life safety inspection. I'm not sure why that would be waived.
Yeah, I have a huge issue with that as well. It should not be waived, because essentially it's the rest of the public who don't have business paying for fire to do their
Exactly.
job, which they should be doing.
Yep.
And, the people who are requesting that to be done should be paying that. But I think that's a different issue to talk about later, or some other point.
Anything else? No? Commissioners? Anything further to say?
Yeah, I did a little bit of reading on this. It was just, basically everything I read, including a paper on the subject, said, yeah, we shouldn't basically, I mean, I know we want to disincentivize short-term rentals, but the owner-occupied, it seems like, is the group that should be the most protected. They're not really taking anything away.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times that's, how they are living here in Seward. So, like, I think whatever we do, we should definitely keep them as a separate group. And, it's that focus, like we said, on the whole house rentals and other such things. And the one thing I wanted to say, if we go with a cap, though, like, are we going to revisit that cap in the future? That's kind of a question we should think about, too, as Seward grows and whatnot. Like,
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we can talk about that, but how, maybe it's based on some sort of scale per capita or amount of homes, and as we continue that more and more and more, maybe it could slide up.
That's good. Yep.
Okay. Nobody has anything else? No? Becky?
For people like me that missed part of the meeting, I was working, we're going to be airing this one, and there was a previous work session right before this, right? Or no, just, what time
Just
did
this
this
one.
start?
This started at 6.
Okay, we'll be airing this at 8 in the morning on 91.7, re-airing it for anybody who wants to listen in. And I also had a couple of comments just as me. I really think that it would help check and balances and relieve some of the pressure on enforcement of the city if the businesses, all the businesses actually were listed on the city, like the Kenai Peninsula Borough has them listed, the state does, and so that would also help people find a place to stay, actually all the businesses, not just the B&B businesses. And it would also help people, they could check and they could say, hey, they're running one next door, but it's not. And it would also help people say, hey, if the businesses are listed, I better get my license, or people will know I'm, just some kind of accountability there. And so that was my 2 bits on it. I think that would really help on that. And to make it all cut and dry, black and white, there's been some selective enforcement, and so that just needs to, so that's how I kind of think that the listing on business licenses would help. And I also don't feel that the ones, in fact, one of the reasons I came down to speak is I know that my neighbor is one of the ones that their name keeps popping up, teacher, B&B, house. They're going to do it right. Me as a neighbor, I don't have a problem with them. If there was a way to see if people live here all winter and that's their primary residence all winter, they both teach, they're here all winter, they're not part of the problem. So, and I don't have a problem with what they're doing. And so I also think that there has been a problem, an issue with some people with some not having, whether they're not sure or whatever, but not getting licensed or collecting sales tax. And it was pretty blatant. I mean, they had websites on VRBO and everything like that, but nothing was enforced, sales tax weren't collected, and it was kind of a thing of who you knew. And so, kind of think that would be...
Right, and I understand what you're saying, that they have a program here that helps them. They've
Yes.
acquired that program there. And also, too, with, the enforcement or just making things a little clearer, Jason is putting together basically a checklist for people who want to do certain types of, lodging, bed and breakfasts or whatever it is. And so it just makes it a little bit cleaner, because it is hard to wade through some of the things at times to figure out, where am I in this mess of housing, lodging, whatever. So we're most definitely working toward that, and I think what he's moving forward with is going to be super helpful.
Yeah, it was just kind of, and it was kind of, I ran in circles when I did mine. I didn't know, do you get this license first, that license first, the inspection first? Can you get the inspection without the license, or... So there, I went in circles, and every department had just changed a person, it seems like, so that wasn't, didn't help much. but there is a lot of, I go to get my eyes looked at, and that's in a place that used to be a residential house and a daycare. And so it just seems like the B&Bs are kind of taking over, especially the ones in the full houses. But like I said before, even though my neighbor was interested in renting a full house, I don't think they would find a problem, because they're still going to teach and still be here all winter. And they're, not a winter bird, they're not going to leave even during the summer, so.
Oh, good. Well, thanks, Becky. Appreciate that. Okay. Well, anybody have anything else? No? All righty. Well, we'll adjourn this work session at 19:35 hours.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.